A sexual predator turned serial killer is on the prowl in Middle America. His crimes are as devastating as they are bold. One of the key pieces of evidence that links him to his last victim will be tested and proven in 1 hour. The worst crimes imaginable can occur in the least likely places. But regardless of culture, geography, social or economic status, murder is murder. At the most extreme are the killers who take lives as part of their sexual perversion. These individuals carry out the most heinous of crimes with forethought, precision, and planning. They are usually completely without remorse. Such is the case of Robert Leroy Anderson of Sioux Falls, South Dakota. Ultimately, what ends up convicting Robert Leroy Anderson is a remarkable discovery, using the simplest of ingredients put to the test in the crime lab in an experiment that takes only 1 hour to complete.
Sioux Falls is the largest city in the state of South Dakota and was an excellent place to grow up. In fact, the city had twice been ranked by national magazines as being the #1 city in the United States of its size to live based on education, housing, low crime rate.
For a lot of years, particularly 1995 through 2003, 2010, South Dakota averaged about 1 murder, 1 intentional homicide a month statewide. So not a lot. You get some, you just don't get very many of them. We just have a relatively low crime rate compared to other jurisdictions.
As the details of Robert Leroy Anderson's case become known, fear and repulsion grips the entire state of South Dakota and beyond.
We lived about an hour and a half away at the time, but it was very big news. People were concerned. It made the headlines in a tri-state area, and we followed the case rather closely, but there were a lot of details we didn't know until we started investigating the case.
Authors Phil and Sandy Hammond couldn't help but be drawn into the mystery surrounding Anderson's case.
We had written a couple other national bestsellers, true crime, that occurred in this area. And as we were traveling around the Midwest, we had many requests to write a book on Robert Leroy Anderson and the serial killings out of Sioux Falls. But we assumed somebody had already written a book about it. It was such a huge story.
Anderson is born and raised in Sioux Falls area. As a younger man, he worked out of state for a time, but returned home, married, and had a family. Despite the outward appearance of normalcy, Anderson had a dark side that he could sometimes barely conceal. This dark side manifested itself in spousal abuse and often made even his closest friends turn away.
Robert Leroy Anderson came from a very dysfunctional family. One of his relatives told us that Robert and his 2 brothers were taught by their father that women had no meaning in life. They were objects, they were not to be respected, and Robert took his sexual fantasies to the next level with that kind of an attitude towards women. The family was so dysfunctional, there was a time when Robert Leroy Anderson, his 2 brothers, and his father were all incarcerated in the state penitentiary at the same time. He grew up actually not too far from where I lived, kind of a lower middle income area Ironically, very close to the state penitentiary. He actually went to the same high school I went to.
When we first started investigating with this, we thought maybe he was operating at a lower intellectual level. He was actually very intelligent. He was in some advanced classes in school.
He went on to be an engineering major postgraduate, and his professor said he performed very well. But Robert Leroy Anderson had a dark side. He started sharing with friends as young as 14 his desire to abduct and bind and rape and murder women. So he had a warped sexuality from a young age.
He'd try to find people who maybe shared the same ideas he had, but most of his friends kind of wrote it off as some really extreme, maybe guy talk that had gotten out of hand.
It has been proven that if the seeds of sexual perversion exist in a person, they're often planted very early in life. There'll always be the argument of nature versus nurture, but researchers often find that there seems to be a definitive event that sparks what we would consider an illness in that person.
He did have not a split personality, but he was able to come across as one kind of person to his wife, another kind of person to the people he worked with, and then he could keep these dark fantasies hidden beneath the surface and only reveal them to close friends who he thought he could trust.
Most convicted killers do not have these crazy fantasies. They don't have a premeditated wish to repeat the offenses over and over, and even less do they tell people about their weird desires.
The fantasies that he had were enough for him for a while, and after a while, that was not enough. And he had to move to that next step of actually abducting someone. And he took a lot of time in fantasizing about how he would do that. And people who've worked with sexual sadists say he was probably obsessed with those thoughts from the time he woke up until he went to bed. It was all he could think about was how he was going to abduct someone, who he was going to abduct, and what he would do after he had abducted a particular woman that he had his sights on.
He started developing a plan. He started sharing with friends. He wanted a co-conspirator to get involved with him as he became a young adult. And he started developing all these different ways that he was going to abduct women.
Anderson's first kill is in August 1994, and it is a crime that baffles authorities and remains unsolved. He hatches his plan in secrecy, and it calls for an accomplice, someone he already has confided in and who is easily manipulated. This person is Glenn Walker.
Robert Leroy Anderson worked at John Morrell, which is a meatpacking plant. He was a refrigeration technician. And these crimes that he committed were not anonymous. He set his sights on somebody. So some of the people who were involved did work at John Morrell meatpacking plant.
In the early 1990s, Larisa and Bill Dumasky and their two young children were living in the Ukraine. Now, the Ukraine was going through a very difficult economic time at that point in history, and a good job was very difficult to find. So they qualified for asylum to be able to come to the United States, and they settled in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. Both Larisa and Bill landed jobs, good-paying jobs, at the John Morrell meatpacking plant.
And everyone just loved her. She was really the light of the life in her particular department. Once Robert Leroy Anderson set his sights on Larisa, he spent a lot of time planning exactly what he was going to do. And his plan at this point involved having somebody help him to abduct Larisa.
There's no such thing as a minor sexual offense. There are just different degrees of severity of sexual offenses, from the random, spontaneous act at a school function, a college party, to this premeditated, long-term planning of multiple victims and end up killing them at the end of the sexual issue. That is the far end of the pendulum of sexual offenses.
They live with dark thoughts and impulses that can often become obsessions. They observe and they plan, and they not only choose victims that suit their ideal, but these individuals constantly search for opportunities to get away with it, to act on their base instincts and not get caught. The whole point is to commit these crimes, get away with them, then act again. This is the mark of a serial predator.
Robert Leroy Anderson of Sioux Falls, South Dakota, is a small-town monster with no regard for women. He harbors disturbing fantasies about abducting women, binding, then raping them, before ultimately killing them and concealing their remains. He lives with these terrible impulses and brazenly begins sharing them in hushed tones with trusted friends.
Robert Leroy Anderson was the stereotypical serial killer. He started sharing these bizarre fantasies, and they became fueled through bondage and rape pornography.
Larisa Dumasky and her husband had come to America to obtain a better life for them and their children. Working at the John Morrell meatpacking plant, she and her husband are forced to work opposite shifts in order to care for their small children. It is while she is on shift that Larisa first meets Robert Leroy Anderson. It is this meeting that will lead to his obsession and ultimately her tragic end of life.
So he and Glenn Walker come up with a plan that when Larisa is leaving the meatpacking plant at about 1 o'clock in the morning, that they're going to be waiting for her. And they had flattened her tire, and when she comes out, nobody else happens to be going to that area of the parking lot. It's a huge parking lot. So as she's approaching her door and had evidently put her keys in the lock, Robert Leroy Anderson comes up behind her and grabs her, and there's a struggle, and his friend Glenn Walker helps get duct tape around her hands and her feet, and they get her in the trunk.
It's very strange that someone who is taking these violent, fatal steps towards a female victim is going to tell another person and employ them to help him. That's almost unheard of. But it's well planned out. It's at the end of a shift, at the end of the night. It's in the far end of the parking lot. He is still concerned that he can't overpower her by himself. He wants no mistake. So he employs Walker to go with him to force her into the vehicle.
And as they're driving away, Glenn Walker gets cold feet and he says, I want out of this. I don't want to be a part of it anymore. Well, Robert Leroy Anderson doesn't need him anymore. So he drops Glenn Walker off at his house, and then he takes Larisa to a predetermined location.
We'll never really understand why Glenn Walker agreed to help, but clearly Anderson has some very persuasive power over his friend. It's very telling that Walker changes his mind after the abduction, only going partially down this dark path with Anderson. It might suggest that his moral compass isn't quite as damaged as Anderson's. Regardless of why, Walker bails, leaving Anderson to finish the job on his own.
He takes Larisa to a predetermined location, which was probably around Lake Vermilion. He does torture and kill her. He wraps duct tape around her head and her mouth, leaving her eyes open, and she suffocates. Then he puts her back in the car. He goes back home. He sleeps for a while, goes back to get Glenn Walker and says, "You need to help me bury this body." And so they go to a bush that Robert Leroy Anderson had picked out around Lake Vermilion. They dig a shallow grave. They put Larisa there, and in that way, he feels he has incriminated Glenn Walker enough that Glenn won't tell what happened.
Larisa and her husband were working different hours. That allowed them time to be with their young daughters. And Larisa was working the 5 in the afternoon till 1 o'clock in the morning shift. But on that morning, Larisa did not show up. Bill woke up and she was not in bed. He got up wondering if she left and went to the store. He waited, the morning went on, and Bill started calling friends to see where Larisa was. Nobody had seen her. So Bill got in his vehicle and he started driving through the Morrell's parking lot. He eventually finds Larisa's minivan. There's a flat tire on it, and her car keys, the van keys, are hanging in the driver's side door lock. So immediately he's alarmed. He contacts authorities, and an investigation starts right away. They start interviewing people that got off work with her, interviewing supervisors, but Larisa has just vanished.
Anytime you get a missing person, the obvious is to go to the family, and you have to either confirm or eliminate them as potential persons of interest. So in this case, the husband makes the complaint. He's distraught. He has an alibi, he's home with the children. It's fairly easy to eliminate him as a prime suspect. Now your circle has to go out. It has to start going wider and wider within the community to determine who did this.
The investigators thought, well, did she have a boyfriend? Did she just run off? People that knew her knew that wasn't true. There was a huge community search for Larisa. Posters were put up, armies of people searched anywhere that a body could be dumped nearby, and it went on and on. But again, she just totally vanished. It runs cold. They have no clues whatsoever or how to find Larisa Dumasky.
Having achieved his first kill and never once being treated as a suspect in Larisa's disappearance, Robert Leroy Anderson becomes emboldened. Just 3 months later, in November of 1994, Anderson plans his next attack, and again he manages to manipulate Walker into being his accomplice. As investigators come to learn, Robert Leroy Anderson's hunting schedule can be tracked by his days off, requested at work. He always ensures he has an extra day off. This becomes a key piece of evidence.
One of his plans was to disable a woman's vehicle by flattening a tire, either in a parking lot so they couldn't hop in and get away, or he made sharpened objects. One of his plans was to get an accomplice with walkie-talkies. They would be in 2 separate vehicles. They would follow a woman, the car would go ahead of the female, get far enough ahead to stop the car, lay the tire popper in the middle of the road, and then when the vehicle hit the tire popper and the tire was disabled, then they would abduct the woman.
He obviously did his homework. He knew how to color these, he knew where to put them. It matches the highway color that they're traveling on. If it was a color that contrasted against the pavement, and when you're driving, you see anything show up on the pavement, so you turn around it. If it was the same color as the pavement, you would not see it and go right over it, especially if it's a thin, sharp project that's facing the tire.
On a pitch-black night, they target a young woman named Amy Anderson, no relation to Robert.
Amy Anderson was a beautiful businesswoman who was having dinner with a friend, and she lived outside of Sioux Falls. So after dinner, she's driving her friend back home, and a car comes behind them and is kind of looking in the window, and it passes them and pulls right in front of them, and Amy tries to back off, and they get this cat and mouse game going of one car passing the other, and Amy's just wanting to back off and have this person leave. Well, as they're going down the road, the car pulls ahead. They continue down the road and she hears a clunk, like something bounced underneath the car. And they thought they ran over something in the road. She gets to her friend's house and realizes that her tire is going flat, but she says, it's okay, I think I can get to a gas station, get it pumped up or get home or something. So she heads back home or heads to a gas station, and before she gets there, her tire goes flat. So she pulls over, she opens up her trunk, and she's getting a jack out, and she is going to fix the tire. And just then, that same car pulled behind her, and she thinks, oh, it's a good Samaritan. You know, he maybe is feeling guilty about driving crazy like that, and he's going to help me. And she says, oh, you know, the jack is in the trunk, and he doesn't make a move. So she reaches in to get it, and he comes and he grabs her from behind. Now, he had Glenn Walker with him, but Glenn Walker got cold feet. He froze.
The flaw of a tire popper is that it can either be quick or it can be a slow leak, which would allow you to be able to escape if it doesn't work. In this case, the tire didn't go quite flat enough. She was able to avoid them after they tried to capture her.
Amy struggles and she pushes, and with all her might, she manages to get away. She sees headlights coming and she flags down the car, and they do stop, and they let her get in the car and they take off. They call the police, but Amy's not able to give much of a description. It was nighttime. She couldn't really see either man. She just knew there was 2 of them.
This near miss is investigated by police and reported on by the media. Anderson and Walker again avoid being connected to the crime, but now Walker is completely unnerved. He tells Robert Anderson that he's out. He won't be an accomplice to any more of his planned abductions.
Anderson is now a serial killer rapist. He had one success in his mind. He's had a failure. He knows that the police are now looking in the area. So he expands his search. He's still going to continue. There's nothing to deter this guy from killing and raping women. And he now seeks out another victim on his own. We'll have no witnesses. The weird part of these serial rapist killers, it's not any victim. It has to be a special victim. They have to want this person and do this person, A, because of opportunity or appearance.
It's August 1996 in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. Nearly 2 years have gone by since Robert Leroy Anderson's last attempt to kidnap a woman with the intent of raping, torturing, and murdering her. He has one victim to his credit, Larisa Dumasky, but a second abduction attempt fails, and he's lost his accomplice, Glenn Walker. Anderson is forced to lay low and devise a new plan.
Anderson has been forced to rethink his tactics, but he's still haunted by the need to do harm. Sexual predators can't just turn it off. They need to strike again. Someone like Anderson would constantly be looking for another opportunity to commit even more horrific violence against an unsuspecting victim.
Piper Streyle and her husband are the quiet, God-fearing type of folks who just recently returned to South Dakota. She's a dependable pillar of her community. And at first blush, Piper's disappearance seems completely random and out of character for her. There is little to suggest the awful planning that goes into the crime behind her disappearance. When the details become known, it shocks even the most experienced law enforcement personnel, including former Attorney General for South Dakota, Larry Long.
Piper Streyle was kidnapped on July 29th of 1996. She and her husband Vance, their goal was to start a church out in the western part of McCook County, which is about 20 miles west of Sioux Falls. And they had a place that they called Prairie View Bible Camp, which was a trailer house and a lean-to. They didn't have a lot of money. They were just getting started, as young couples often do. And they lived there in their trailer house, husband and wife and 2 kids. They had a little girl named Shayna who was about 6 weeks short of her 4th birthday. And they had a little boy named Nathan who was 2 years old the day before his mother disappeared.
How this friendly, outgoing, and beautiful young mother suddenly becomes targeted by a deranged killer is almost completely random.
Robert Leroy Anderson's father was living out near the Lake Vermilion that was west and north of Sioux Falls, South Dakota. So Robert had to drive by the Streyle residence quite often when he went out to see his father.
And when he was driving down that road, he would sometimes see a woman, he didn't know her name. He would see her out in the yard getting the mail or something like that.
Now, Piper was petite, she was pretty, she was actually a former high school homecoming queen.
What begins as a fleeting glance of Piper Streyle in her own yard becomes fuel for the darkest of Anderson's thoughts. He increases the frequency of his trips to see his father and slow down or pause near the Streyle residence. With every sighting of the petite, attractive young mother, Anderson becomes increasingly obsessed. His urge is out of control. He begins planning her abduction and violent end.
Now, he didn't have Glenn Walker to help him anymore, so he had to come up with a different plan. He got to know her patterns, her husband's patterns, the family's patterns, and so one Friday, he shows up at the door, and he knocks, and he's surprised to see her husband answer the door, because he was not supposed to be home. He would normally be at work.
By chance, Anderson shows up at the Streyle home. On the same week, they're hosting a youth Bible camp. Piper's husband, Vance, is home, taking time off work to help run the camp.
And Robert Leroy Anderson stammered around and said, do you guys run some kind of a camp or something here? And Vance said, yeah, well, we run a Bible camp. And Vance notices in the driveway a black Bronco, an SUV, pure black, flat black. Even the rims were painted black. The bumpers were painted black. He thought it was very strange. So Vance says, well, you know, why don't you give me your name and phone number and we'll get a hold of you and give me your address and we'll get you some information.
Robert Leroy Anderson is kind of thrown. He's not good on his feet like that. He kind of stumbles around. So Robert Leroy Anderson does write down his name and his phone number, and he gives that to Vance, and Vance knows where he puts it. He puts it in a drawer where he keeps that kind of thing.
It's a classic mistake. Here's a very intelligent killer, but I think he was so unnerved by a man answering the door that he just made a classic mistake and wrongly gave his name and address and phone number on that sheet of paper.
No crime is committed yet, but it's damning evidence for Anderson to leave behind. Now he's more compelled than ever that Piper will be his next victim. And if killing Vance as a witness is necessary, he's prepared to do that too.
This is the first mistake. He writes his name and phone number on a paper. Not to be deterred, he still continues on with his plan to capture the wife and kill her.
Anderson has now seen Piper Streyle up close, and this is fuel for his darkest thoughts about what he wants to do to her. He's not about to just abandon his plan and go home at this point. He needs to up the ante and deal with Vance if need be.
So then Robert Leroy Anderson has to go home and he has to adjust his plan. And this time he brings a gun with him, a pistol with him, and he decides if Vance opens the door that he's going to shoot him.
So the next Monday, on July 29th, he goes back to the Streyle residence, but now he's brought the 9mm handgun with him. Robert Leroy Anderson knocks on the door. Little Shayna, who's almost 4 years old, answers the door. Robert pushes his way in, and he meets Piper coming down the hallway. He yells at her to get on the floor. Piper refuses. He shoves Piper back down the hallway and into one of the children's bedrooms. He finally gets Piper wrestled to the ground on her stomach, and he handcuffs her, hands and ankles.
And she yells to her children, run and hide, and they do. And he takes Piper, carries her out over his shoulder.
When they get out to the parking lot and he tries to put Piper in the vehicle, Piper is still struggling and fighting. Robert Leroy Anderson shoots the 9mm handgun off near her to frighten her some more. The semi-automatic 9mm spits a spent shell casing into the Streyle driveway. But the sound of the pistol unnerves Robert Leroy Anderson. He needs to get out of there. He looked for the spent shell casing, but he couldn't find it. So he puts Piper in the vehicle and hops in and takes her away. He's taken her to a secluded area that he has along the Big Sioux River. Very vegetated, very tall trees. And on the way there, Piper tries appealing to him. She tells him she's menstruating. He says, I don't care about that. She says, my husband's the only man I've ever been with. Please let me go. He laughs that off. He takes Piper to this secret crime location.
He spent some time putting this plan together. He's built a board where you would be able to secure a person to it with metal clamps and straps to be able to put her in a position for bondage for sex. He has handcuffs, he has duct tape, and he's able to capture her.
Remember, these cases aren't about sex. They're more about domination, control, and power. Anderson can only feel powerful when he's in control, and that means the victim must be helpless. He needs them to feel terror. He wants them to beg for their lives. It's the stuff of nightmares.
What happens next is horrific.
He did have duct tape around her head at some point. He slowly strangled Piper.
And rapes her repeatedly and sexually tortures her.
Every sexual sadist turned killer needs something from their victim. Anderson needed to dominate. He needed to feel powerful. He needed to frighten his victim. All of these things fed the sick appetites of Robert Leroy Anderson.
As a sexual sadist, the pain gave him pleasure. It's one of the hardest things to read about and talk about.
Piper Streyle is abducted from her Sioux Falls, South Dakota home on the morning of July 29th, 1996. The violent incident occurs in front of her children, ages 4 and 2. The children are immobilized with fear, having hidden inside the house as their mother instinctively told them to, while fighting for her survival. Her abductor, Robert Leroy Anderson, eventually drives Piper to a secluded area where he rapes and kills her. It is hours before anyone even realizes Piper is missing. Piper's husband heads directly home to find a police officer waiting with his children. His concern is obviously focused on his wife's whereabouts, but likely quickly shifts to what his kids, especially his daughter, just witnessed.
She talks about how a mean man took Mommy, and she gives them the information about a man in a black vehicle. At the same time, they're trying to search the area, but also they set up a roadblock to see if maybe somebody else along the way had seen anything. And of course, they're stopping every vehicle, and nobody has seen anything.
Investigators catch a break when a county employee doing road work in the area comes forward with an eyewitness account of an odd encounter with a black Ford Bronco.
The county road grader operator, he'd been actually working the road that day, and he had met a black car, a black four-wheel drive Bronco or a Blazer, he said. He'd met it 3 times in the space of about 2 or 3 hours at various spots near that home.
He says he was coming one direction on the road. A black vehicle was coming the other direction, and it was a very distinct vehicle because he could tell even from a distance it was flat black. It was all completely black. But when that vehicle got about 100 yards away, it did a U-turn, went into the ditch, and went the other way. So he thought, well, that's odd. And he's grading the road, and a couple hours later he comes back, and that same vehicle is coming from a different direction, now from an east-west direction. And he noticed where it went. And then later on, when he ate his lunch, he saw that that vehicle was parked by the Streyle house.
He panics. What he did at the house when he went the first time was leave his name and phone number. He knows that this is going to come out, so he rushes back to the house to try to get that note. He's now trying to cover up these spontaneous things he did during this abduction to keep him from being caught. He's disguised his vehicle with a flat black paint substance, the entire vehicle. The little girl, when he kidnaps Piper the first time, sees this black vehicle. When he panics to come back, he passes a county road worker. There's numerous people now seeing this black vehicle, which the police can now link to her disappearance. It's the first break they've had, and it will turn into a bigger break as the investigation goes on.
Late in the evening, Vance remembers something. He remembers that the previous Friday, there had been a man who showed up at the house about 7:30 in the morning, and he was driving a black car with black wheels. And Vance described him as a guy who was late 20s, early 30s. And Vance had a conversation with this guy who indicated that he was there to try to get his kids into Bible school. Vance also remembers that the guy said his name was Robert Anderson.
Police managed to take the information that Piper's husband can remember. And through some overnight investigation, police managed to track down a name, Robert Leroy Anderson, as a very likely suspect. Police catch a critical break when they connect the dots with Anderson's family and track down the phone number of Robert's father, Leland Anderson.
Even though it's now almost 2:30 in the morning, one of the investigators calls that number. A woman groggily answers the phone, and the investigator just makes up a story.
One of the investigators says, "Hi, my name is such and such. I know it's late at night, but I'm looking for Robert Anderson. I'm working on buying a car from him. Do you know Robert Anderson?" And she says, "Well, yes, that's my son's name." And he says, "Well, is he there? Can I talk to him?" And she says, "Well, no, he's not here. He's at work at Morell's right now." And when the investigators hear Morell's right away, it brings back memories to them of Larisa Dumasky disappearing from Morell's.
The disappearance of Larisa Dumasky 2 years earlier from the Morell's parking lot is suddenly brought into focus, and police waste no time going to the location to look for Anderson's vehicle.
So they go to Morell's and they find the vehicle because they now have the plate. The problem is it's not black. It is a royal blue with a white racing stripe on both sides of the vehicle. So it's clearly not a black on black vehicle. Well, they don't know what to do with that, but they decide they better keep an eye on this guy, so they have somebody stay there until he gets off work.
It's a completely different color than all the witnesses have described to this point, which is the county worker, the child, the husband, have all described a flat black vehicle. It causes a tenuous moment for the police. Now they have to figure out what is going on here. Is this true? Is it false? Why has this vehicle changed color so rapidly?
They stake out the Morrell's parking lot and they wait until Robert Leroy Anderson gets off work. They follow him to see where he goes, but he ends up going to his home and going in and going to bed.
The investigator, who is very seasoned, goes to Robert Leroy Anderson's house and says, "Hi, I'm Officer so-and-so," and says, "I'd like you to come down to the police station and answer some questions." And Robert Leroy Anderson says, "Okay." And right away, the investigator sees red flags. When somebody comes to your house and says, "I want to question you at the police station," you say, "Why? What happened? Am I a suspect? What's going on?" And he was just so calm about it.
And he voluntarily comes down and agrees to an interview.
The detectives inch closer to the truth, but still they are struggling to connect the black vehicle witnesses saw at the Streyle residence with the shiny blue and white model that Anderson has driven to the police station.
They asked him some questions about the vehicle. They basically said, "Have you washed it?" Well, he said, "No, but I recently painted it about 6 weeks ago, and I've been purposefully not washing it until the paint sets."
This is a critical piece of the puzzle, but it still doesn't add up. Anderson offers a weak explanation about painting his vehicle weeks ago, but the suspected vehicle in the abduction, spotted just one day earlier, was flat black. His story isn't adding up, and the detectives know it.
And now they tell Robert Leroy Anderson, "We have search warrants. We don't like some of the things we're hearing. You're going to have to stay at a motel with your family. We want to search your resident, and we're going to search your Bronco." They find a couple of toolboxes. One of the toolboxes, the investigators named it the torture box. It had ether in it to knock somebody out. It had eye rings. It had bindings. They find the homemade bondage board.
We also found a cash register receipt for Kraft paint that was purchased on Thursday, 16-ounce liquid bottle. And it looked like it's black finger paint is what it is. It's water-based paint that kids use for watercolors and that sort of stuff. And in the vehicle, they found lots of property in there that had black paint on it. They found several spots on the vehicle where there were runs of black paint.
It's just like when you wash your car and you're all done and you have little bits of suds in the cracks. He couldn't wash it all away.
Police are still trying to determine the whereabouts of Piper Streyle, who's now been missing for more than 24 hours. Robert Leroy Anderson is their only suspect at this time, but evidence is almost non-existent. Anderson's connection to Piper's disappearance is tenuous at best. He owns a Ford Bronco, but it's the wrong color. Police catch another break, a receipt for black finger paint sold at a local hardware store. Investigators also remember seeing remnants of black paint on Anderson's truck while visiting him. Could this be the key piece of evidence they need? There's only one way to find out.
One of the DC agents took the receipt and went to the store where the purchase had been made and said, "What is this stuff?" And the gal says, "Well, that's 16-ounce black water-based paint." Showed him a bottle. And he said, "If you thinned that out and painted it on a car, would it wash off?" And she said, "You know, you're the second person this week who's asked me that."
And the other person had said that they were in there, they were going to paint a friend's car as a prank. They say, "Well, if we showed you a picture of this person, could you identify him?"
And she picked out Robert Anderson as the guy who had bought the black paint on the previous Thursday.
That's your moment of fame right there. The second time, who else asked? Robert Leroy Anderson. There's no saying, I'd rather be lucky than be good. It pays to be both. You have to have luck in police source.
Robert Leroy Anderson's story is now unraveling quickly, the police uncover a wealth of damning evidence inside his Bronco and find even more at his home. For a suspect to paint their vehicle temporarily, however, seems beyond the pale. Investigators need to prove it can be done.
Now, they weren't sure that they could paint an entire Bronco with a half a bottle of that paint. So they bought another bottle, and the guys in the lab borrowed a red and white Bronco from one of their buddies. And they thinned it out, and they painted it in about 20 minutes and had it black.
In law enforcement, everything's time. Time is your enemy, time is your friend, and it's a ticking clock, and it just goes. And every bit of evidence you get is so important. And when you finally get that one piece, you have to act quickly.
And then they took it to a car wash and used a wand on it and had it clean in 7 minutes.
Investigations can go on for days, months, years. There's always that critical hour, I call it the hour you live for, when everything you think and plan or are given comes together. And it's that bang, bang, bang inside of an hour time space that you're able to recreate, prove, and then eventually convict the person committing these horrible crimes.
Like many investigations, luck seems to be the key ingredient to solving the case. But in this instance, police create their own luck through persistence and following the smallest of hunches. A receipt for paint, a truck's color which didn't match the suspect's, a hardware store clerk with a story to tell. All of these things put police in the right place at the right time. Within an hour of testing their theory, the case against Anderson builds. Without a doubt, he is guilty, and this monster can finally be locked behind bars, where he belongs.